All right, here we go. So I wanted to give us some things to think about. If you look in all the news and everything, there's obviously lots of systems being compromised. There are lots of hardware. Nerman mentioned about the ASUS routers that are past end of life that are still out there, and they've all been targeted. We heard about it this week. So there's always something going on in cybersecurity. So it's always a good idea to learn more about what we use for authentication, authorization, identity and access management, IDAM. That's all part of security operations in the new Security Plus study guide, the 701 study guide. So I wanted to talk to us about biometrics. In the Security Plus study guide, and again, we use Security Plus because that is, as far as we know, the most widely sought entry-level certification. There are others, but this one seems to show up the most when somebody is looking for entry-level experience. In section 4.6, it says, given a scenario, implement and maintain identity and access management. That includes authentication, authorization, and what we call the 3 factors of multi-factor authentication. And we'll get to that in a second. Here are some recent news headlines I pulled, and they're all within the last 30 days. The scary one, I guess, the second one, Microsoft is collecting biometric information and didn't even notify the people that use the system that that's what they were doing. What do you do about warrantless phone searches? In other words, what can legally be done if somebody like a police officer comes and says, open your phone for me, etc. Biometric surveillance. Are they assembling this information somewhere and using it to watch for you? And then the fourth one, OpenAI wants to give you $42 in crypto to scan your eyeballs. I thought that was kind of cute. So that's for biometrics. Does everybody remember the 3 factors of authentication? There are more than 3, but what are the 3 main factors of authentication? And you must know this for your Security Plus and anything in cybersecurity. What are the 3 factors? Mentees.
What you know?
That's one. What are the other 2?
What you have.
What you are.
And what you have.
And what you have. Exactly right. So what you are, what you have, what you know. And if you look down at the bottom, it's kind of small, but there are other factors. For example, there is one that says where you are. Using geolocation, it is possible to look at your source IP address, and if you're not using a VPN, it is possible for them to tell geographically where you are. Also, another one is behavior dynamics. How you move your mouse can actually be mapped, or things like that, keystrokes or whatever. They can be mapped as a factor for authentication. But the 3 main ones are what you are, what you have, and what you know. So where do biometrics fit in? Which one of those are identified with biometrics? Anybody?
Fingerprints.
Right, but which factor are fingerprints? Okay, I'll make it fast for you. It's what you are.
Yeah, I mean all those. Yeah, I mean.
Okay. And that we're going to have a discussion about that right near the end, because this is where the privacy advocates get real itchy. But fingerprints or other biometrics are part of what you are because they talk about you. They measure you personally. There are lots of different types of biometrics. Some of the ones that are being used more recently, I don't know if you saw, but the Apple 16e does not have a fingerprint reader. The Apple 16e, the iPhone 16e, only uses facial recognition. They've stopped with the fingerprint scanners. So Apple seems to be destined to move toward facial recognition and not fingerprint scanning. Just something to think about. So there are lots of different ones here, but I'm going to focus specifically on fingerprints so that we can get an idea of what we're talking about when we say biometrics. How do you measure who you are? So here is a quick description of a fingerprint and how it's used. When your finger touches something, let's say, well, I'm going to use my phone. This little button on the side of my phone is actually a button and a fingerprint scanner. So when I go to unlock my phone and I put my finger on that scanner, it tries to respond. It tries to read it. So the example we have here, you have a bunch of points on your finger. There we go. I'm going to use the correct finger. You have a bunch of different things going on your finger. And when you, see, now it's unlocked. When you place your finger or whatever you have onto a device, it measures these, they're called minutia points. Minutia. You'll hear me use that in this presentation. But they're divided into three groups, and they're called levels. So minutia points are divided into three different levels. Level 1 are the most common and apparent ones that you can see with your naked eye. An arch or a tinted arch, a left or right loop, a double loop, or a whorl, as it's called. They are considered to be level 1 features, minutia points for your fingerprint. Like it says here in the description, they are not sufficient by themselves for individualization. In other words, you could have loops and whorls that look remarkably similar to somebody else's loops and whorls in their fingers. It's not precise enough to use for primary authentication, like it says here. You can use it for exclusion, to say if you've got a right, let's see, left or right loop. If you've got a right loop, but the biometric is looking for a left loop, that could be enough to exclude your fingerprint and say it doesn't match. But it can't be used to say you have a right loop, we're asking for a right loop, so you're the right person. Many people have right loops, okay? So it's not precise enough. So let's go to level 2. Level 2 includes formations, including ridges, and where they start, where they stop, where they split, where they combine, where there's a ridge that's just a dot all by itself, etc. So it's using what are called like line units of your ridges. A bifurcation where it splits into two. An eye where it's actually surrounding a dot or something like that. That's called level 2 features. And then level 3 gets down to the incredibly fine portion of your fingerprint, such things as pores, where your pores are arranged on your actual fingerprint. It could be, ridges, breaks, scars, etc. Those are all part of what are called level 3 minutia points. Okay, so we now have, and I think the next slide, the next slide describes it. Level 1 pattern is, do you have a loop or a whorl or whatever? Level 2 is, how are the lines arranged within those loops or whorls, and level 3, what are the pores in the lines of that loop or whorl. So they require increasing levels of magnification. Everybody, does that make sense to you so far? So you need higher magnification in order to see level 2 and level 3 patterns. Here is a couple examples of the minutia points that are collected when someone lays their fingerprint onto a fingerprint scanner. And if you notice, there's a lot of them. And when they do this, they are measuring, I'll go to the next slide. They're measuring both the location of where that minutia point is, but also if it has a particular direction, like your left and right whirls or swirls or those sorts of things. So it does the location and the direction also in reference to each other. That's how you can put your finger on your fingerprint reader here or here or here, and it will read all of them. It looks at your minutia in relation to the other minutia. So that's how you can put your finger on a fingerprint scanner here or here or here or here, and it will read them all. Okay? So it's pretty complex what is done for biometrics in order to be able to read your fingerprints. Any questions before we go on? Okay, so your fingerprint, you've heard it everywhere. Your fingerprint is unique. No two people have the same fingerprint, right? The answer is yes, that is true. They have demonstrated that no two people have identical fingerprints at the level 1 and level 2 and level 3 detail, okay? But so your fingerprint should be absolutely unique. Nobody is going to take you into your local police department. You get booked for a traffic infraction, and they check your fingerprints, and they say, oh, nope, this is a mass murderer, you know, over on the island of Fiji. You're not going to find that. However, there are some issues that we'll get into in just a minute. But fingerprints, you guys all know this. They're used for criminal identification. When you go somewhere and you get, they call it being booked, you get put into the book where they put your fingerprints. Background investigation is another big one. I volunteered for a job with the Sheriff's Auxiliary Volunteers down here in Pima County. And in order to do so, I had to go up to the county police headquarters and submit my fingers onto their system so they could run a background check on me and make sure that I wasn't a mass murderer. And thankfully, I guess I passed. But they're also used for background investigation. Employment, it is possible that you could be at a job where they're going to require you to, employment or device level, they're going to collect your fingerprint for use in your job to log into your systems. They can all be used. And remember this, your fingerprint is one factor, and that factor is who you are. Remember that. So capture resolution, that's the challenge we run into. The capture resolution, in order to guarantee that your fingerprint is unique, all 3 levels of minutia have to be captured. All 3 levels. That means you have to have a very good fingerprint scanner on your laptop, on your phones, etc. It has to be able to collect level 1, level 2, and level 3 minutia, or else you end up having the possibility of duplication. Somebody having the same level 1 minutia as you, remember it says it can be used for exclusion, but not for authentication. Level 1 and level 2, I'll point this out. Level 1 is between 200 and 300 points per inch. Level 2, which is the FBI standard, is 500 points per inch. And level 3 is 1,000 points per inch. Okay, so that is a pretty high resolution for these things. And that is in order to capture those minutiae. I hope everybody's staying along with this. But 500 points per inch is the FBI standard. That's only levels 1 and 2. In other words, level 3 minutiae are not captured according to the FBI standard, but level 1 and level 2 must be. Okay? So if somebody has a system where they use biometrics and they are FBI compliant, they would be 500 points per inch. So why don't we all use 1,000 points per inch? Well, basically it's cost, because when you increase your scanners, you have to increase them all. In other words, let's say I wanted to put biometrics on all 1,000 employees in my company. I would have to make sure that every scanner scanned to 1,000 points per inch for level 3 minutia. Otherwise, you couldn't capture it. If there was one scanner that didn't do 1,000 PPI, you couldn't use it. Every scanner has to be raised to 1,000 PPI, or else you can't log into that place. So there is a tremendous cost to go from level 2 to level 3. And oh, by the way, the FBI still says level 2 is acceptable. So when you're looking at it, I went out and I found 1,000 PPI scanner, and it's $415. Now imagine that times your 1,000 employees. You have now added almost $500,000 in hardware to your infrastructure just to implement 1,000 PPI scanners. Okay, it's a big thing. And yet when you look at your external scanners, laptops, my laptop, I double checked, it's 500 PPI. iPhones, 500 PPI, except the iPhone 16e, which doesn't have any fingerprint scanner at all. So just something for you to think about. Yes, level 3 is great. Yes, level 3 is more precise, but it's much more expensive as well. And when you make that jump, you've got to do it for every scanner in your infrastructure. Every scanner. Quick fingerprint trivia. The typical human fingerprint contains as many as 150 ridges. Have you thought about that? That's a lot of ridges in that fingerprint. Just something to remember. Here's another one. When you do place your finger onto a scanner, it captures from 25 to 80 minutia points. And that's for level 2, remember. 25 to 80 minutia points. And that's what's used to determine your biometric signature, who you are. Okay? And here's what the National Institutes of Science and Technology says. All statistical models that they've tried to work with in the past 100 years only used level 1 and 2. So even if you decide that you want to go with level 3, that may make your system less compatible with other systems because they're only using level 2. So level 3 is a great ambition, but very few organizations that I know of, none in fact that I know of, are at level 3 for their biometrics. They're only level 2. So remember, 20, 25 to 80, level 1 and level 2 minutia points are extracted from your fingerprint and placed into the system to verify that you are indeed who you are. That means, remember, we're now talking about who you are. One of your three factors is being stored on that system. That means if that system is compromised and their, let's say their security access manager, SAM, is extracted, your biometric identification, one of your three factors, can be exfiltrated and exist out on the dark web. Who you are can also be sold just like user IDs and passwords. Something to think about. Okay? So now we're going to get into just how accurate are these minutia points and systems that are measuring them. When you take your fingerprint, it compares against all the minutia points and figures out if a certain number of them, in other words, a majority of them match, then you are authenticated. But it's not 100%. Let me try and explain that. It's not 100%. There's what's known as a false accept rate and a false reject rate. A false acceptance rate means that if you put your stuff on there and you have a right whirl and the biometric for you says there's a left whirl, but all of the other minutia points match, it's going to pass you. That's called a false acceptance rate, or somebody else that has a finger that's very close to yours. If their minutia points, if enough of their minutia points match yours, it'll be a false acceptance. It's not you, but they accept it as you. It's called a false acceptance rate. Or how about a false reject rate, where you put your finger on the fingerprint scanner and it says, I didn't catch that. Put your finger on again. I'm sure you've experienced this, where you have to sit and put your fingerprint, you have to put your finger on the scanner 3 or 4 times before the scanner says, oh, it is you. Those are false rejects because you put your fingerprint on the scanner and it doesn't catch it. For whatever the reason, it could be a dirty scanner, it could be dirty fingers, it could be that you just stepped out of the bathtub and you got wrinkles in your fingers or whatever, but there could be enough minutia points that don't match so it won't pass you. That's called a false reject. You really are you. You put it on the scanner, but the scanner doesn't see it all and doesn't accept it. That's called a false reject. Okay? So now we get into what's called the crossover error rate. You're going to need to know this. The CER. It's where they try and get the false acceptance rate as low as possible so it's not passing improper credentials or improper minutia points, but your false reject rate is high enough is low enough so that, let's see, I'm going to word it, here it is. No, the false reject rate is high enough, but the false accept rate is low enough so that you can get accurate logins, readings in biometrics, but it's not 100%. There is an acceptable amount of error in biometrics. And I give this example. If you're asked to give a 20-character password or a 50-character password, how many of those characters can be wrong in order for you to get your password passed? And the answer is none. Every character has to be exactly correct or it will not accept your input for your login. Is the same true for biometrics? And the answer is no. There is an acceptable level of error in biometrics. That's that false accept rate, false reject rate in what's called the crossover error rate. And they want that to be as low as possible, but it's never zero. Okay? So in biometrics, errors are considered to be acceptable. Imprecise biometrics are considered to be acceptable. And remember, this is the privacy concern I told you about. Who you are is stored on that system, and if that system is compromised and gets exfiltrated, who you are could end up out on the dark web. One of your multiple factors could be exfiltrated and is possibly able to be connected to your user ID and password. And therefore, the two factors of multi-factor authentication are accomplished by the exfiltration, illegal exfiltration of your biometrics and use by a malicious party. So my conclusion, this is Scotty's conclusion, biometrics are great as one of your multi-factors, but it cannot be the only factor. So if you remember any of the systems that you've used, you would, for example, I remember logging in with a PIV card. It would be, I would slide the card in, that's what I have, and then I would put my fingerprint on the reader, and that's who I am. Those are two of the three factors. And in some cases, I would even be required to put in a PIN, what I know. Okay, have, know, are. Any two of those are helpful, three are even better, but one by itself, especially biometrics, error is acceptable. So you should never use a biometric-only system of authentication because error is acceptable. In the other two, it's not. What you have, you know, if you've got a card that you put in and you put in somebody else's card, those two cards are unique. You cannot substitute one card for another. Your PIN, if you submit a 6-digit PIN and it's not the right 6 digits, it's not going to be accepted. Those are 100% accurate, but biometrics are not. Why? Because the human body is not accurate. There's always the possibility of false rejection of your CEO when he tries to log in at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And guess what? You're going to get that phone call saying, I can't log in. What's wrong with my system that I paid for? You know what I'm saying? So the answer is multi-factors. Biometrics is useful for one of those factors, but it should never be the sole factor. And I'm going to leave you with two kind of scary quotes in reference to monitoring systems. Not all of them are biometrics, but they give an information. These are conversations that I've had, people I've spoken to. One of them was my manager, and she said that the TSA Clear program, which uses iris scanning, refused to connect to allow her in the system because they said the eye scan that she used was already being used by somebody in the system. Her iris matched someone else's iris. Now remember, it's because of the level of detail of those minutia points. Not that they were truly identical, but they were close enough to where they said, we can't register you in the TSA Clear program because somebody else has the same eye pattern for biometrics as you do. And he said this, if you look up, I can tell you what color eyes you have. From a satellite, however many miles up in orbit, they can tell you your eye color. That's kind of interesting. And of course, I get to my buddy who works at a a three-letter agency near Washington, D.C., always, and I mean always, wears reflective sunglasses when he goes outside. Always. Always. Even when it's overcast, he's wearing his sunglasses. And he works up there. So just something to think about when we talk about biometrics. Can your biometrics be captured? Yes. You have latent oils on your fingers, and people have demonstrated this with some of the cheaper scanners. You just take a bag of warm water and lay it on the scanner, and it can actually register using the latent print of the last person that was there. I've seen it done. So are biometrics perfect? Nope. And are they designed to be perfect? And the answer is no. Cool. That's all I have. Anybody have any questions, comments, something you want to bring up? I'm going to put this link in the in our chat if anybody wants to go read this. This was a really interesting read. Anybody have any questions, comments?
It was really good.
It is a very interesting topic. It is totally different.
Yeah.
I can't think about that. Good topic.
Yeah, biometrics are great, but they will never be the only method. You always have to have another factor. Cool. All right. Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm going to turn off the recording now.